is to post this recording along with the previous ones for everyone to be able to have the opportunity to hear if they may have missed. So Medea, if you can press record, that'd be wonderful. All right, we have thumbs up. We'll go and begin. Welcome, hello to the next session in our resilience series brought to you by the U.S. Green Building Council, USGBC, Middle Atlantic and New England regions, in full partnership with the Society of American Military Engineers, SAME, New York City Post. I am Lieutenant Colonel Ben Wallen, a member of the steering committee for this series. And today's topic is the future of military engineering innovation for resilience. This series has been a monthly lunch and learn opportunity for the first half of 2021. And so just in case you missed it, some of those sessions we've had include in January, we focused on risk reducing strategies for schools post-COVID-19. In February, we brought you economic impact of sea level rise and storm surge in the tri-state region and consequences of a no action scenario. In March, we had an outstanding session focused on the national and international efforts to rethink codes in light of resilience, as well as the Resiliency Code, enacted temporarily after Superstorm Sandy 9 years ago, and then since codified permanently. And now it's in its final round of improvements. And then just last month, we had an incredibly well integrated and interactive discussion by leaders from 6 different organizations regarding resilience rating systems, better buildings and better communities. A link for the January session is already posted on the USGBC YouTube page, and the rest of the recordings will follow soon. With that said, we have 2 more great sessions after the one you're in today. On the 9th of June, the Lunch and Learn series will crescendo with a session on the science of storm surge risk reduction, a discussion of the world of outer harbor gates as implemented in other countries and here in the US, and what a similar solution could look like in the New York Harbor. In either the very end of September or the 6th of October, we'll confirm that in the very near future. We're planning a culminating resiliency all-day event, which will include 2 keynote speakers, updates from speakers from the previous sessions, and 2 panels debating the future and impact of storm surge gates, as well as changes to building codes and HVAC. There will also be an environmental justice discussion with Wellington Chen, Executive Director of the Chinatown Partnership Local Developing Corporation, and advertisement registration for this event will be forthcoming. The overall focus of that day is centered on finding a way to bounce forward, as we in the resilience world like to do. And we'll share more on those and the registration for those events at the end of today's session. I do want to thank and recognize the entire team that has pulled these different events together over the past months. Ms. Susan DiGeronimo, Lieutenant Colonel Retired Joe Pervecchio, Lieutenant Colonel Retired Eric Backus, Colonel Retired Joe Manus, Mr. Mike Scarano, Ms. Sarah Quickla, Ms. Medea Villeria, and Mr. Gautam Trafalgar. So thank you to all. And this session today is registered for 1.5 PDHs for engineers and 1.5 hours for GBCI accreditations. Today, we have 2 incredible leaders guiding us through our discussion today regarding the future of military engineering innovation for resilience. Brigadier General Thomas Tickner and Colonel Matthew Luzzatto. Brigadier General Tickner is the commander and division engineer of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers North Atlantic Division. He has served in a variety of tactical, operational, and strategic assignments spanning a period of 27 years. Some of the highlights include a deployment to lead the Los Alamos Fire Recovery Office when assigned to the Sacramento District of USACE. He served as an engineer branch assignments officer at the Army's Human Resource Command, followed by command at the Philadelphia District, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, from June 2008 to July 2010. Brigadier General Tickner worked as the military assistant for the Assistant Secretary of the Army Civil Works, followed by commanding the Savannah District of USACE from July 13 to June 2015. He served as Chief Army Budget Liaison in the Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Financial Management and Comptroller, following his return from a one-year tour in Afghanistan, where he served as the Engineer Director for the Combined Security Transition Command Afghanistan. And prior to assuming command of the North Atlantic Division, Brigadier General Tickner served as the Commanding General of the Pacific Ocean Division, USACE, in Fort Shafter, Hawaii. Colonel Luzzatto is the New York District Commander and District Engineer of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Colonel Luzzatto has also served in a variety of assignments throughout his distinguished career. Some of the highlights include serving as Executive Officer for the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, where he managed the efforts of the senior Pentagon staff responsible for the Trump administration's oversight and direction of U.S. Army Corps of Engineers' $20 billion plus civil works and disaster supplemental efforts across the nation. From July 2015 to July 2017, he commanded the USACE Charleston District in Charleston, South Carolina. And under his command, the Charleston District completed the project partnership agreement and design for the $500 million Charleston Harbor Deepening Project, while simultaneously responding to the catastrophic events of South Carolina's 1,000-year flood in 2015 and the impacts of Hurricane Matthew in 2016. During today's presentation, Brigadier General Tickner and Colonel Luzzatto that they provide, please feel free to place your questions you have in the chat. We will have a Q&A period at the end of the session. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct pleasure to have Brigadier General Tickner begin our discussion. Sir, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Ben. And it's great to be back with Sammy. I think this is the second time I've been able to interact with you. But Medea, great to be here. Talk about a whole bunch of subjects today with the Corps of Engineers. We're going to focus in on our Civil Works program, and I think that kind of matches to what you've been doing over the last couple sessions. I wish I was there in person, and I guess we all wish we were there in person. We could actually enjoy getting our credits, but also enjoying each other's company. But I'll tell you, to me, this just talks about resiliency, how we're continuing on, in the face of COVID. I'm in Germany right now, so I wouldn't be able to be there anyways. But we're continuing to get together to share ideas and to learn from each other, which I think says a lot about both societies. So thanks, and definitely Matt and I both look forward to seeing you all in person. I think this is a good combination. I'm going to give you kind of a big overview, maybe talk about resiliency without specific projects in mind necessarily, and then Matt's going to show you how he's been doing it for a lot of part of his career and get into the details of the real challenges about it. But look forward to your questions and comments as we go through this. I'm going to bring up the building or the learning objectives for today. It shows kind of what we're going to talk about today. I am going to give a big broad overview of USACE, but what I want to expose you to is how USACE operates around the globe, and specifically, in support of our national security strategy and national military strategy. Like I said, I'm here in Europe right now. I've become organizations, and I'll touch on those in a subsequent slide. But it's all about strategy, and USACE and engineers and industry fit right into that. And then our economy. We're not going to really touch on our other missions that much, but if you look up and down the Northeast here, a tremendous amount of involved with, and that does drive our national economy. We got a wide array of engineering efforts in the U.S. and the world. We're going to focus on civil works today, but really resiliency is involved in all of this. So military, civil works program, our regulatory program, our environmental program, contingency operations, and then coastal resiliency of which we have a center of expertise in the Northeast within USACE that we're going to touch on today. Again, we're going to get the biggest portfolio of civil works project. A lot of it came out of post-Sandy, but a lot of it was happening before Sandy even hit. And we can show, what projects actually and which projects we hadn't gotten off the ground yet and really wiped out whole neighborhoods. So it's a really, really good example. It's been studied a lot and is pushing us into the future of, where we should be doing projects. And more importantly, where we partner with local governments and maybe move out of certain areas or and then the last one there, talking about the how do you implement a civil works process. And if you've been involved with the receiving end, I'll tell you one word: it's hard. It's really hard because it's not just the Corps of Engineers; the whole of government approach to these big civil works projects. It's locals, entities that have to get involved with tremendous amounts of funding, but it's people that pull together. And I think Matt can probably bring in some specific details on those challenges. So we'll go to the next slide. I'm just going to give you an overview of USACE and the North Atlantic Division. And we got 6 of the 43 districts, that are within the U.S. There are 4 outside the U.S. And we have 2 of them. We cover from Maine to all through Virginia, at least on the coast, down to Norfolk. And so that's New England District, New York, which, Matt runs right there out of Manhattan, Philadelphia District, Baltimore, and Norfolk District. And then I'm with the Europe District this week. They're located in Wiesbaden, the entire EUCOM and AFRICOM theater. And it's made up of people from all over USACE for 3 years to there's a couple of people that have been here for over 20, some real experts, and also our local nationals, which are German citizens, but we have Turkish, Israeli citizens. Why is the North Atlantic? What's so unique about the North Atlantic Division? Because every division is different. If you compared us to the Mississippi Valley Division, we're remarkably different. One is, our military construction that we do, and we'll touch on that while we're there. But the North, there's 25% of our shipping. There's probably even more than that in what's going on with the economy, what's driving the economy. But it's a very, very important part of the United States. So why is that significant? Well, it makes doing projects like the ones we're going to talk about today really, really hard, because there's a lot of people that live here, and they all seem to want to live really close to the coast over time. So it wasn't necessarily planned, not what we would like to have planned. So we got to work within that area. I will say I was out in the Pacific, Taylor that, and Matt was down in the South Atlantic Division. We can probably cover a whole bunch. Pacific Ocean Division, it was Korea, Japan, Alaska, and Hawaii, which really covered the entire, we call it now the Indo-Pacific, because that's the region, the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean. But not a lot going on in some of those countries, but USACE and what we're talking about today touches every country. And I'll probably just say it now, and maybe I'll talk about it again when we talk about Africa. But the one thing that gets the United States in the door to other countries is our expertise, specifically in resiliency, because everybody's worried about climate change. And that worked all throughout the Mekong. And it's working similarly in Africa, which I'm just learning about now. But what we do is we bring industry to bear on those challenges in those locations. I have to warn my own folks, hey, we're not here to save the world, but we are here to make a difference. And what we bring to the table is wanted by the world, which allows our Department of State to actually do a lot more engagements with those countries. But if that excites you at all, please, I welcome some questions on that at the end. We'll go to the next slide, which is kind of an overview of our military side of our program. And resiliency is here too. I mean, I've been looking at green roofs all day. Some beautiful stuff happening here in Germany on schools that we're building. We're building a brand new hospital. There's incredible amounts of resiliency built in. But I was with the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Installation Organization, and the definition of resiliency from him was the capability of the Army to avoid, prepare, minimize the effects, recover from extreme weather or other events. So that's his official one. That fits what we're going to talk about today, but I'll talk about a civil works one on a subsequent slide. But North Atlantic Division has the biggest program because not only is it in the Northeast where we cover all the facilities, DC area, I should say Baltimore to DC area, but also what we're doing here in Europe. And so significant amount, it's about $2 billion a year. And if you look across the other programs there, environmental, lots of cleanup at Superfund sites with EPA, and that is definitely in our area. New York, New Jersey, even down into Delaware, a lot of work there with the EPA. The work with Veterans Affairs, I think we're getting ready to build our first major hospital with them up in Connecticut, but it's been going on around the country, lots out west where we do that work. And we do incorporate a lot of the resiliency designs into and other things that I think the audience here is familiar with LEED programs into our buildings. We'll go ahead and program perspective, but again, it's a significant program that district perspective. I'm gonna want to switch to our support to UCOM. I'm here now, and even in COVID, we're resilient about getting over here. But I would tell you, Europe right now, definitely Germany, it's pretty much locked down. I mean, the only way you're getting food is if you do takeout food. And so tonight, I'm in a hotel. I'm going to walk across. We're going to get takeout food, and that'll be my. The lot going on in Europe right now, and it's in the news. We even take care of Israel out of our Europe office. And there's a lot going on in Europe or in Israel right now with some rocket attacks that happened over the last couple of days. We're doing, the military construction support for them through different mechanisms, not necessarily MILCON, but through foreign military sales due to our partnership with Department of State. Lots of moving pieces in Europe. So I think there's a few people out there that have probably served in Europe. And so the footprint has been changing. There was even talk at the end of the Trump administration that we would potentially, and it's still being looked at. And there's definitely some courses of actions that are out there. But we're doing some major construction right here in Germany. You wouldn't know that we would. I'm looking at Dodia schools right now, and we're still building them. What a great place to bring your family for sure, because it's just incredible what we're doing. The one of the things, activities in Poland, because the Poland reached out to the U.S. a few years ago and started saying we would like more presence. And not only do we want to do that, we want to build infrastructure for you. And so requirements that would take to probably put a BCT, so a brigade size, a large brigade size element, and other supporting equipment and units there. And so we're the Corps of Engineers working very closely with them how to design these camps in a resilient way, probably like the definition I used prior, to where it can recover quickly from natural and man-made events. So if that is interested to anybody on the group, feel free to either we can talk today or reach out to us to talk about items in the future. But a lot of the things we do, projects and engagements through UCOM, but also through Department of State to many of the countries depicted on the screen here, and that could be schools, clinics. It's exciting to put a construction project out there that gets people to work together. It could be any vaccines, which I'm sure we'll start doing, although I don't know that we're going to do that for a fact, but I think we're definitely part of the world program of pushing vaccines out. Or you can put a school in an area that needs it, and we can talk to the local citizens about where they want to put it, what do they want it to look like, and then we hire local contractors to do it. It works really, really good around the world. I have experience doing that in the Pacific, and now I'm seeing it in Europe, and we're going to get to Africa here in a minute. But lots of science and technology in Europe. A lot of exchanges because there's a lot going on here from the science community. But ERDIC, Engineering Research Development Center out of Vicksburg, Mississippi, and we coordinate and bring them in to do a lot of that work. And water security is big here too. So our water expertise that the Corps has, we bring that to bear, whether that's in the Netherlands with shipping and the surge barriers, the major surge barriers that they have there. We actually take a lot of information from them because they have a lot of expertise, but we're also on some of these rivers systems with it throughout Europe. That allows us to Africa. So last week I was in the United States, but I had a conference call with the AFRICOM. So General Townsend is the AFRICOM commander. He's located tomorrow, but I got to sit in and listen to his command, what he was trying to do. And when it came to be my turn to talk, I told him, I heard you talk about global power competition and how you how you win that is access and influence. I thought you were talking right to me, and here's all these other 4-star generals sitting around the table. But I really did think he was talking to folks like us, because you're not going to get into Africa because you're a big army, or if you're want to go do certain countries. But most of them they have problems, and whether it's a medical problem, maybe vaccines, that's a great way of going in to do exchanges. But what the Corps of Engineers offers General Townsend is our expertise in climate change and resiliency. In his testimony to the Hill, we had congressional members asking on climate change in Africa, and his thoughts were those many of these countries, they don't want to talk weapons, they don't want to talk training, they want to talk climate change. What can you help me with climate change? It's going to could cause mass migration. It could change people's lives. How especially when it comes to rivers, if they're altered significantly, and we have a lot of experience in that. One, we have experience altering rivers and know the outcome, and we have a lot of experience, working with nature and trying to mitigate or fix rivers or make them compatible. And I did work out in the Mekong, where we brought the Mekong River Commission to the United States. They met with ERDIC, and we showed them, turbines that go on some of our large dams, and they're, fish friendly turbines. How you can have a fish friendly turbine, I wouldn't even begin to try to pass through and survive, or at least the survivability rate's high. I'd have to have my scientists prove that to you, I'm sure. But those are the types of things that the rest of the world is looking at. And in Africa, there are definitely dams going in Africa, and have been consulted. And what we do is we share information of the the positive effects, but the negative effects that are out there. And also, there's river systems that go between countries, so interconnected. We have lots of rivers that go between states, and we fought over them. It's a democracy. We put everybody in a room, we yell at each other, and then we solve those problems, or we attempt to solve them. And that's generally what we're thinking of doing in Africa. The photos up there are pictures of our humanitarian assistance projects. Lots of clinics, valuable to the people, but specifically to our U.S. embassies that are located throughout, because they'll use that for years on how they interact with the public. The airplane there is our largest construction, 12 A-29s. That's the picture of the airplane. Pretty small airplane, but significant to that military as they fight, an insurgency battle that's happening there. And we'll be there training them. Our role in all that is the infrastructure, so hangars and security, runway. But our U.S. Air Force will be there for many years, training them how to maintain those airplanes and use them for their mission. I will mention just countries there. That is a river commission that's formed enough to invite us in, and Department of State is paying for us to go there to share. So if you have expertise in that area, it's not like we're looking to go to big construction projects, but we're always willing to bring in our other forums, and societies are one way of connecting with other countries. So if I sense that there's some of our societies to do some virtual things with us, and again, taking a commission. I'm on 3 commissions here in the United States, here in the Northeast. I may take those commissions or keep people from them to the maybe we won't feel we have as many once we get here. But okay, we're going to do it now. Start our deep dive into civil works, and using civil works as the venue. And really, this is a transition, give you an overview of what we do in civil works. And I'll first start with money. So for the civil works program, generally over time, between $5 and $7 billion a year. A lot of money, if a lot more, to do all the things that we do in civil work, because it's not just projects that are resiliency type of projects. It's the ports that we maintain. It's the regulatory program. It's a lot of other things that we do. And Congress recognized that too, because they've given us Superstorm Sandy, and Matt can probably quote exactly how much money he's gotten for that, but it's a significant amount of money that Congress put towards Superstorm Sandy, the fixes afterwards. The East Coast and the Gulf Coast, we've had significant funding, $18 billion one year, and probably like 11 in another one, and states that were touched by it were able to put that money toward their some river systems. For NAD, we get about $1 billion a year that we're executing. Now, a lot of these projects, we'll get into how long they take, because you got to plan it first, and that does take some funding. But when you finally get to construction, that's where you're spending, hundreds of millions of dollars a year to actually implement. Civil works program, though, we talked about the ports. Some pretty major deepening projects have happened over the last few years. There's still some in the works, and federal government standpoint, what's the right depth, what's the right investment? We study all that. A lot of people fight over that. I think Matt's probably right in the middle. We do have them up here in the Northeast. I think it's about 40 some dams and levee systems that are along our river systems. We'll go to the next slide and talk about our a coastal storm risk management. And this was going on well before Superstorm Sandy, but I'll tell you that probably highlighted it. We got a guy named Mr. Joe Vitri. And so if you've done any work in civil works for the Corps of Engineers, you probably have heard his name, because he runs the Planning Center of Expertise, which is about 100 people located all over USA, so virtually connected. And they are experts in the planning, which I'm going to cover here shortly. But when I look at this, these folks are all about resiliency. They bring the expertise, and they're working with industry, working with educators on new ideas on how to implement some of these things, and eventually get them written into a scope of work, or at least the specifications. As Coastal Engineering Research Board, I'm actually on it. The Civil Works CG is on it, and then we also have civilians on that board from industry and academia, and this Center of Expertise briefs that board on what they're thinking. A lot of folks from ERDIC are briefing, but most important, that board, especially the civilian members there from academia, they're bringing those ideas, and it's the ideas that you've been talking about in your seminars here, and so it is being heard. It's a challenge to implement sometimes, but those ideas are out there. So we'll go to the next slide for how we're doing this in the Corps of Engineers. I'm going to start off with the definition. This comes out of the White House in 2017. They said resilience is the ability to anticipate, prepare for, and adapt to changing conditions and withstand, respond to, and recover rapidly from disruptions. And they kind of stop right there, but it's, for me, that's disruptions from natural disasters. Something that's happens right now. I mean, I'm in Europe, so I haven't heard the latest. With the oil pipeline. If that is still out, I think we're having major problems. So I got to catch up on the news there. But we're still going to stay. And these principles that are outlined in some of these references here. We prepare for it. We absorb the impact. After we prepared, we absorb it. We quickly recover, and you could say where we are in there. It's a constant circle that keeps turning around. And if I asked, Matt, where he is with Superstorm Sandy, we're coming up, 9 years from it. Where are you? Well, he probably has projects because they were done pretty quick, and he's preparing for other ones that weren't part of Sandy, but have learned a lot of lessons learned. But he's also in the middle of a lot of other projects that are in these other sections. The rest of the world kind of looks at what point, Department of State looks to us especially with climate change expertise, and has put us on, within the administration to share our expertise. But where I like to see him is out at U.S. embassies, talking right with other countries, um, experts in their area, because just about every country has people studying this, especially if that's their vulnerability. And we definitely have shared lots of information with them and have learned a lot. I guess one of the basic tenets of resiliency when it comes to a Corps of Engineer project is the community. What is the problem? What's the community? And so community can be defined at almost any scale, shape, or size, but always represents a collection of interconnected people, environmentalists or environments, services, economies, and infrastructure. And then in community resilience, the emphasis is placed on bringing together a broad base of stakeholders and supporting partners to help the community define its greatest risks and support decisions and decrease those. I mean, that's an academic way of saying what Matt does every day. And it's easy to look at what he's doing because he's got lots going on right within the New York area. But how do you pull all these people with different desires together, corral them under a program or a process? And we're gonna go through some of that today. And a lot of you have been through this before, and I look forward to hearing maybe some of your thoughts. Because our partners, it's not just the federal partners, because if it was, these projects would all fail. And typically the ones that do fail are the ones that we lose interest at the local level. Federal government thinks it's a great project, but then we lose interest. And so the project has no buy-in. But from a federal part, very big at the the reaction to an event. But they're just as interested in reducing the impacts of those events. They would just as soon not have to react as significantly they do every time there's a storm. Includes societies like we have here today, academia, definitely the private sector has interest. Usually they're the first ones that maybe identify a problem. But then we get down to the real meat of it, which is our states, our regional, and our local governments and organizations that will really come to the table with the passion to get these projects going. Okay, we'll go to the next slide, Ben, and we'll talk about some references here on the resiliency. And we continue to move forward on how we do resiliency. I have some pretty good examples that a typical way of what the Corps of Engineers thinks or has built over years. So I was the Pacific Ocean Division in Hawaii. A storm hit the big island of Hawaii, and tremendous amount of rainfall, flash flooding. We watched it on the news, and all this water rushing down the hills right around the town of Hilo. Within a day after the storm, people were and went to the newspapers too, and was just thanking the Corps of Engineers for this, again, saving his town. And what it was we channelized water around the town through concrete channels, and it bypassed the town. That is one way of doing it. We've learned a lot along the way with lots of more sustainable ways of either holding back the water or letting it go to certain areas and flood on purpose certain areas and then slowly drain out. And there's a lot of features that on the coastal areas, it doesn't have to just be a seawall. There's a lot that we can do, and we're going to show some examples coming up. But these manuals here, are just the most recent examples. So if I definitely welcome you to download them, read them, and if you have input, these are the types of things that our Coastal Engineering Research Board are using. So as ideas come in from academia, we chew on them and then we put them in these manuals. So the folks that actually are doing this work, Matt and his team, they can reference here and work with the stakeholders on what we're going to put in place. Let's go to the next slide and just show a simple example of one of what's the most recent ones that if you have any questions on it, you can save it and ask him, but I'll just present it here as an example. And it's, Rockaway, Jamaica, Sandy, the focus was on providing ocean-facing projects, coastal storm risk management. So sand dunes and beaches to protect the sand dunes. And they were highly effective. The places that had it, they protected from the towns and infrastructure that were in through the minimal sand dune that was there, if any, and right into the streets and slowly filled up. One example I have is when I was the Philadelphia district commander, we hadn't had a storm for a long time. Projects on the beach, which were these sand dunes and beach projects, and not just the federal government spending a significant amount of money, but also the local states were doing that too. But when we went back to look at them after it a little bit, but the dunes were intact, and the but from this project, what we were looking at was, I believe this is one with the back bay, because we were only focused on the front side. Well, the back bay with Superstorm Sandy was just as damaging, if not worse. And so this one looked at some unique things in order to alleviate some of those damages. And I want to give you some examples here. Now I don't believe there's surge barriers on here, but that is something we look at. And in the Northeast, up in Connecticut, New England area, we have those surge barriers out there. But back bay flooding is a significant thing, and we see it around the world too. Let's show one more quick example. And this is kind of an outcome after Superstorm Sandy. We did a North Atlantic coastal comprehensive study. So back in 2015, it was complete. It identified 9 areas that we needed to focus on in the Northeast. City of Norfolk was one of them. Obviously, it's a low area, the largest Navy base in that area, which will be affected by a storm surge in that area. And so right now, we are going through planning, flood walls, levees. How do we make it more resilient? Including, and I think probably very important to this group, is how do you do floodplain and zone that? We definitely will share. This is an area it's not worth putting in a flood wall. You should just make it a floodplain. It'll help absorb the storm. But a lot of it's just adopting green infrastructure solutions also. One, that's what our stakeholders want more and more of now that they've been educated on the different methods that are out there. And we want to do that too, because it's effective, sometimes even more effective at absorbing a storm versus just trying to physically stop it. But it takes more, I'll leave with this, it takes more than USACE civil works projects to successfully be resilient. It's not going to work, and it's not designed to work that way. It's designed to partner with stakeholders at all levels. Okay, Ben, I think I'm ready to go to the next slide, and I'm getting ready to turn it over to Matt shortly. If I'm running too long, please cut me off, but I think I just have one or two more here. So the diagram at the bottom kind of gives you an idea of what we'd be looking at from a coastal resiliency. And so these are all types of, and so from right to left, we have the beach and dune system. And if you go to the New Jersey shore, and now, Long Island, we're doing some stuff there too, in place for the last 25 years, more, even longer than that, and they do work. But what's even better when we come in a little bit more, and we have the estuaries potential, all that, what our ancestors filled a lot of that stuff in. And what we're finding is, hey, no, that really did serve a good purpose. It absorbs the storm before you actually hit, the real shoreline or the main. Once you're off the barrier island and onto the main, there where we have, it is important. If you got infrastructure there, you're going to have a combination of some of these more softer absorbing techniques to shoreline protection, potentially a levee and a wall. There's a great way of making that, and that looks really good. A lot of our stakeholders would like to have boardwalks or trails on there. And that's all good. For us, though, it serves a purpose, and it's a flood risk reduction. If you're going to live there, you need to elevate above level. That should be, or at least the risk associated with that. And so some folks will, and we have zone, and potentially that's what local governments.
Did he freeze?
He may have frozen.
He made it through most of it.
He was doing wonderful.
Let's give it a couple seconds.
All right, sir.
All right. I say shoot him a text and say, hey, sir, you froze up and we've transitioned.
All right, let's do it, sir. I'll send it over to yours. He was just going to close out by talking about implementation process, authorizations, and then...
Actually, you know what? Let me brief it. Let me go back to the becomes a law slide there. No, the authorization and appropriation.
Okay,
so
got it.
That leads right into what I'm doing.
Perfect.
Okay. Hello, I'm Colonel Matt Luzzatto. I'm the commander of the New York District Corps of Engineers. Hey, so I'll brief the end of General Tickner's slides here, but before I get started, I want everybody to put their thinking caps on. And, when we talk about innovation, it takes a group of collective thought in order to solve problems through innovation. And so I'm going to go through a series of challenges that I face in the actual execution of projects. And as I do, I want you to think of, in your field, in your position, in your job, what innovative things you could do to help me execute these projects. So as you know, as General Tickner was talking about, we developed the need for the projects from these studies. We go through the challenge of getting the project authorized. That goes up through to Congress, where they then bless off and say, yes, this project is needed. As a voting member representing my constituency, I agree that this project needs to be done. It was a horrible storm. We need to fix it. So that's just authorization. So authorization is relatively easy because that tells you, yes, it's a needed project. Now, the hard part comes when you want money for it, okay? Because money is a limiting factor. As we all well know, the American budget is spread very thin, especially our discretionary funds. So then the next step is the appropriations. So over time, the Corps of Engineers submits a list of prioritized projects that have been authorized. that then goes up to OMB, and those projects are racked and stacked. And those amounts are then given out either through the president's budget or the work plan that follows. So we have two opportunities to get appropriation. That's either it's in the president's budget. If Congress doesn't like everything that's in the president's budget, they have an opportunity through the work plan to go ahead and appropriate additional funds to additional projects. And so once we have that authorization and appropriation, we can go into execution. All right, now go to my slides. All right, so like I talked about, everything General Tickner was talking about is defining the need and understanding the need and making sure that we build the projects in the right place. What I'm going to talk about is how we go from that concept and that overall understanding of needing a project to actually putting it in the ground. And anybody who's built something from IKEA, the instructions are very simple. You just put this screw there and that screw there, and it all just comes together perfectly, right? No, it doesn't. You end up taking things apart 3 or 4 times and putting it back together. So the instructions looked easy, but the execution can be complicated. So we've got our authorization, our appropriation, and pretty much everybody is aligned in what we're doing. Okay, next slide. All right, so what we have here, so forgive my cartoonish sketches, but it's the best way that I can try to tell the story. And yes, this is all my original work. This is what happens when I sit at home and on a Saturday night and decide to come up with a briefing about resiliency. And you know, the point here is to help everybody understand the on-the-ground challenges that occur after the study, after the appropriation, and we're into the actual design and construction. So we've got Hurricane Bob here. It hit a community, and I'm keeping everything not named because I'm going to talk about some examples that are still very politically sensitive. So I'm not going to name any specific projects. I'm not going to name any specific organizations. I'm just going to talk about typical challenges we faced in executing these projects. So Hurricane Bob came along, flooded 30,000 homes, killed 10 people, flooded a local hospital. Hey, we got to fix this. Everybody agreed. Appropriation, authorization, go Corps of Engineers, build this. Next slide. All right, so we've determined what the solution is. Okay, great. We've done lots of studies. We've determined that we need some interior drainage. We need a seawall, and then we want to take into account and utilize a living shoreline to help absorb some of that wave impact. You need the interior drainage to take care of the rainfall as it falls behind the seawall and then drains out. And then obviously the seawall protects the infrastructure associated with it. Sounds easy enough. Okay, next slide. All right, but there's a lot of challenges we face, and how are we going to mitigate them? General Tickner could have opened it up better when he asked me how we were doing. It's been 9 years since Hurricane Sandy. This is a challenge number one, is we always have that microscope of, we gave you the authorization, why aren't you done yet? And as I go through these slides, that clock's never going to disappear because it's always there humming in the back of our heads, ticking behind us as everybody's watching their watch, waiting for us to be done. Are you done yet? Are you done yet? Everybody wants to know. Okay, next slide. All right, so here's where I'm going to start going through each of these. I've got about 30 of these. I've got only a little bit of time, so I'm going to go very quickly. But again, put your thinking hat on and see where you fit in any of these challenges, and then get back to Ben or whatever if you've got any unique solutions to any of these challenges. Now, many of these are age-old, you know, human society long-old challenges. So if you've got a solution to them, please let me know, because it's still a challenge. So one of the first things we always face is you can't build anything without real estate. All right. Everything we build is on land that typically belongs to somebody else, and to be able to acquire that becomes very complicated. So there's things that we can do, all the way from making payments to the individual to having to go to condemnation. Condemnation is always an absolute last resort. Sometimes it's as simple as people don't like something because it's in their backyard. It may not even be on their real estate. We have challenges where we're building a seawall, but somebody had just built a deck, and the deck is only so high, and now I no longer have my view. Sir, I finished up your brief and I jumped into mine. I hope you're good with that. All right. All right. So there you go. All right.
That was the best.
Got it, sir. All right. So real estate and the challenge that we face with people not necessarily, they like the overall concept. We want resiliency. That's great. As long as you don't interrupt the view of the ocean from my house. Okay. And these are real world challenges that we face as we try to execute these things. So again, communication with the landowner. Sometimes if we have to purchase the land, getting those easements, looking at adaptive design to potentially come up with a solution that doesn't block a view. Stuff like that. Okay, next slide. All right. Through time, nature has not worked with us in a lot of respects. And I'm not talking about just the storms. I'm talking about sand likes to move. Things don't stay where we want it to stay. The Mississippi River has been all over the place in the middle of the country. You know, it doesn't stay in one place. There's cities that are now landlocked as the river moves. And we as humans try our best to try to control this, but we are constantly fighting the natural migration of sand, of rivers, and things like that. So we have to take into account and utilize structural systems and natural retaining systems. And sometimes think about the potential of actually relocating out of an area that is not sustainable for us to continue to live in. Always a tough topic, but something that needs to be considered. Okay, next slide. Next, we get into unforeseen site conditions. You know, it all comes down to taking a look at where you're going to build and what's there and what exists. And you can never do enough extensive site surveys. But I don't think I've done a project yet where we didn't find something that we didn't expect would be there. Just like remodeling any old home, when we're building in places that humans have occupied for long periods of time, there's going to be things under the ground or around that we're not aware of and that our site surveys may miss. And these constantly present challenges to us, from old utilities, buried pipelines that are no longer utilized. You know, you dig these things up, nobody knew it was there, and then you've got the challenge of, well, is it actually a pipeline we're using? And these things prevent projects. So having that extensive study of what's historically there in that location, and then doing those site surveys through ground penetrating radar and stuff like that. But always, you got to have some contingency funding to deal with those on-site conditions. All right, next slide. Media. Everything we do, this is the challenge of civil works projects. We do them in and around the community. And the community is very interested in what's going on, and they should be. We all are. If something's happening in our backyard, we want to know what's going on. So we run into challenges sometimes where, again, the overall desire to build the project is very positive. Everybody's behind it. But every now and then there may be a special interest story about so-and-so's community garden that is now going to be dug up because this project is going to happen. And it doesn't take too long for the media to catch on to that and give a very heart-wrenching story about how this community garden is being destroyed by the Corps of Engineers. And it becomes a challenge. So it all comes down to how much public engagement we do before and during the project. You know, if you are not out there communicating with the public, they're going to come up with the story themselves. So we have to stay very proactive with that, stay on the ground, and then have the buy-in of the local officials. I was at a situation recently with a project, and we had a congressman with us, and there we had some very angry individuals there. But if you work things out with the political official or the community supporter ahead of time, they can help mitigate some of those challenges to you, because they are not the outsider federal agency like the Corps of Engineers can sometimes be. So communication, communication, communication. Next slide. Social equity. You know, a lot of this lately coming out, but the reality is, guess what? The rich people's houses are on the coast, and in the back bays is where we see the disadvantaged communities. And you know, we're doing a better job of acknowledging this and looking at this. And I highlight it because it really is a matter of having the awareness that it's there, and then actually acknowledging that is there. The reality is, those folks with the houses on the beach have direct lines to congressmen and whatnot, while those disadvantaged communities further inland may not have it. So we as professionals have to ensure that we keep our focus based on engineering priorities and principles to ensure that we construct the project in the best manner necessary, and not necessarily be influenced by a potential imbalance of equity across the region. All right, next slide. Environmental windows. Okay, we've got a lot of endangered species out there, and as we like to seek resiliency, we also like to seek the maintenance of the things we love about our environment, from the piping plover to the Atlantic sturgeon, and protecting them. But what that creates are particular work windows that we're able to execute resiliency projects. Every endangered species has a time for nesting, mating, and migration, and a lot of times we are directed to avoid those opportunities and those times. And a lot of times those are optimum times to do construction. You know, sometimes dredging we're forced to do in the winter because it is not the piping plover's time to be nesting and whatnot. So some of the mitigations we do is avoidance of those particular areas at different times, ensuring that our construction sequencing allows us to work in areas that are not impactful and then come back to them later. And then working with our partner organizations from National Marine Fisheries or DEC or whatnot to determine what those windows are and how best we can mitigate those windows to the best of our ability, and using the most recent information in doing that. So another challenge we face. And you can see that clock still at the bottom. It's always tick, tick, ticking. I got a general who's asking me, it's been 9 years. Where are we at in Sandy? So he's right there. So, all right, next slide. All right, recreation and tourism. You know, all this resiliency a lot of times happens on the beach. And guess what? People love their beaches. And the local economy loves the beaches as well. And when you come to build a seawall in summertime, you can get some very frustrated individuals. So another sequencing challenge that we have in the execution of our construction, because we don't want to take that away from the community. You know, you don't want to destroy a community's economy while you try to save their infrastructure. There's got to be a balance. So again, sequencing, local coordination, and keeping those local community partners involved to coordinate those. Next slide. Demands on industry. The dredging industry is a relatively small, and they'll say that they're right-sized industry. But there are times when there are emergencies. You know, it happens a lot down in the Gulf Coast when the Southwest Channel will get blocked up from heavy Mississippi rains, and a dredge that may be working on a project in our area has to be pulled away to go mitigate that. So one of the things that we do to mitigate that is we partner up, and we always make sure that the local communities know that when we're going to have our projects ongoing, because the contractor is going to go where the funding is. And if we can align a larger federal project with a smaller community project, it saves the community money because they don't have to pay the mobilization costs, but it also gives more incentive to the industry to say, hey, there's more work here for me. I'm going to stick around here a little bit longer. So we always seek those opportunities with our local communities, and it's really a win-win situation. All right, next slide. Historical preservation. Hey, the reality of our nation is that humans like water. So next to every river, next to every coastline, societies from our Native American communities through history have established their livelihood along our coasts and riverbeds. And as we execute these projects, we come across long buried items, or there's existing historical structures that we have to figure out how we're going to mitigate. We do that through working with our local partners. And then, you know, sometimes you can relocate them, but there are challenges to the point, and I've been involved in projects where we've actually excavated Native American remains. So you have to have those close ties with the Native American community to bring them in and have them given them an opportunity to excavate the site, and we make a determination of what to do with those remains. And that is very challenging when it hits in the middle of a project, but it is something that we must do to respect you know, that historical site as it is. Next slide. Hazardous waste, especially in the New York area. You know, we didn't do things so smart back in the day when we were becoming an industrialized nation. One of the reasons we were able to be so successful is because we ignored a few things, but we're paying for it now. And no matter where we go, we run into materials that may have been buried from previous landfill sites. And the reality is, you know, the government has very strict requirements out there regarding CERCLA, and it becomes very challenging, especially for the Corps of Engineers, to get involved in some of these sites because you got to understand the liability associated with these can impact the federal liability of the federal government as itself. So sometimes we need to lean on our local sponsors to mitigate those, because big picture wise, the Corps of Engineers cannot put all its eggs into one basket of a project, because if we run into a challenge with liability in one project, it can actually impact the entire civil works program for all of the nation. So, sometimes we get some pushback on, we're avoiding things, but we have to keep in mind the entire civil works program. And if we get tied into being one of the potential responsible parties, then that can impact the whole program. So how do we mitigate it? Lots of pre-site surveys, always trying to avoid those locations where we find it, and then working with our partners to go through and make sure that they can accomplish the remediation or removal of that before we build. All right, next slide. Okay, partner alignment. You look at the arrows there, and I was trying to figure out how to do this graphically, but most of the arrows are pointing to the right, because always most of our agencies are pointing in generally the same direction, but we're not absolutely in the same direction. So it takes a lot of coordination that it goes through this to make sure that we get it all pointing in the same direction. And there's always one red arrow down at the bottom that's completely pointing the other way. And it takes the helps of the rest of our agencies to get that going. So having a lead agency, we have a group called the Silver Jackets, with a conglomeration of federal agencies that are committed to working through challenges together. Okay, next slide. Personalities. Okay, a lot of people wouldn't throw this in here, but by golly, working with people can be challenging sometimes, because everybody's unique. Everybody has unique past experiences, and a lot of people have scar tissue from previous experiences. So it becomes very important that when we're working with each other is that we understand each other's perspectives, we're empathetic to those perspectives, and we're patient. And we have to communicate and work through that. I've got a project now where we have one particular personality that could really disrupt the entire project. And so it's going to take the rest of us to get together and try to bring this person on board. And it is what it is, but people are people, and anything that you do that involves working with people is you got to have a little bit of sociology and psychology in the back of your head and figure out how to get everybody on board. All right, next slide. Changing technology. These projects that we take on are not quickly executed. Okay, we've finally got it down to where we have a great 3x3x3 model where the study only takes 3 years, but by golly, that's 3 years. I mean, you look at the evolution of iPhones in 3 years, that's like 3 generations. So as we go through these projects, there's always new technology that comes out, and people go, hey, I know you were going to do it this way, but this new technology came out, you really should do it this way, it's going to save money and whatnot. So, we understand that that's available. Sometimes we can incorporate it, sometimes we can't. But the key here is in the design phase and upfront is involving the experts early, involving industry early, making sure that you bring them on board and tell them what you're thinking about in the design phase, so that they can tell you what they've discovered and what they're working on, so that we can take advantage of that. And obviously engaging academia, because there's a lot of smart folks out there studying a lot of stuff while we're out here trying to get stuff accomplished. So getting all that buy-in is good. All right, next slide. Changing politics, man, we just saw a shift the last couple months, didn't we? This is a reality we face as well with civil works and resiliency projects. We may go from an administration that is focused squarely in one direction to an administration that is focused squarely in another direction. We have to be apolitical when that happens. We have to stay focused on the engineering elements of it, but we have to be astute and understand the changing climate that occurs sometimes with a change in administration, and be able to adapt to that as well. All right, next slide. Beneficial use. This is something the New York District takes a lot of pride in. We always seek opportunities to find win-win opportunities when we're constructing a project. A lot of that has to do with reusing our dredge material instead of just dumping it out in the ocean, is building islands and estuaries for the environment. But sometimes using stuff beneficially costs a little bit more than just dumping it in the ocean. And we have to do what's cheapest. So a lot of times we reach out and make aware to some of the other agencies and nonprofits out there that, golly, if we only had another $1 million to close the gap in taking it from the ocean to taking it to this island, we really could have a huge benefit to the island. So seeking that partner support from partners and from nonprofits to sometimes cover that additional cost helps us get things done. Next slide. Betterments. What we have to realize as a federal agency is we can't just come down into a community and say, we know what's best, we're going to build you a seawall and you're going to like it. The reality is that community's been there a long time and they've had plans of their own for many years. And when we inject this project upon them, we need to give them an opportunity to incorporate what they've been working on through the years into our project. And sometimes that takes a little bit of time and a little bit of coordination, a little bit of redesign. But if we always seek opportunities to do that when able, because we know ultimately it's that community that lives with that project, and we don't want to disrupt what they've done in the past with our project. So early engagement, again, being adaptive design and sharing our info early with the partners so they can understand exactly what's going to happen. All right, next slide. Construction impacts. Nobody likes big trucks driving past their house, but they got to drive by somebody's house. It's on my folks a lot of times to get out there and engage with the public, to explain with them, to mitigate as much as possible, to show them that we're taking actions by minimizing the flow of traffic during certain days or times, and then just keeping people informed. The biggest thing is if people are informed and they feel informed, then they'll be more willing to put up with what can be, an annoyance. But if we keep things moving and keep them informed, it helps quite a bit. Next slide. Safety, always a challenge, any construction. And I'm not just talking about safety of the contractors and my folks. We work inside the community. There's people who get interested and want to come and watch the dredging operations. It's a pretty cool thing to see, but it's dangerous. So we have to take extreme precautions a lot of times to ensure the safety of not only our construction folks, but the people in the community as well. All right, next slide. Community impact. There's portions of construction that are going to block a road for a period of time. We are getting ready to remove a section of a Jersey train line that is essential for commuting. And we get a weekend to get it done. And hopefully it goes well. But those interruptions happen, and you've got to plan way ahead and have that community outreach and information to them, knowing that those interruptions are going to occur, and then try to time them in the most appropriate manner. Next slide. Litigation and liability. It's all out there for many of these things that has to be taken into account. Sometimes during these challenges, individuals are not satisfied with the approaches that we've taken, and we haven't been able to fully mitigate them, and they will go down the litigation route. Next slide. Bureaucracy. It's a dirty word, but the reality is bureaucracy comes from us trying to minimize mistakes that we've made in the past by instituting rules to ensure that the people who may have been hurt in the past are protected. So we have to ensure that we follow all those, but it can be very time intensive. Next slide. Funding disruption. We'd love to get all our money for all these projects up front without interference. But the reality is sometimes this funding comes annually in those president's budgets and the work plans I talked about earlier. And sometimes we don't know when or if we're going to have funding. So it becomes challenging to keep contractors focused and on board if we're not 100% sure we can pay them in the future. So what we need to do at the Corps of Engineers is accurately express our capabilities and the contractors' capabilities to keep work moving, ensure Congress has that information so the appropriators can keep the funding coming as much as possible. Next slide. All right. 3 years, the Navy has dumped stuff off the ocean. Sometimes we find explosive stuff on the shore, so we do a lot of precautions to keep things going. And I'm going to move on. I'm going to go a little faster here. Next slide. I think I'm almost done. Layers of government. Everybody wants a meeting to understand what's going on. Some people are in official capacities, but all the way down in the community, it can be as small as an HOA banding together to raise concerns. And we have to get all these layers of government in line before we can execute a lot of this work. So again, partnership meetings, briefing the engineering elements of the project, and communicating our plans. Next slide. All right, so I ran through about 30 challenges. All right, the big slide's coming up here. So let's take another look at what a project looks like for the Corps of Engineers when we're about to execute it. Slide. Bam. Okay, this is what I face every day and my team faces every day. When we talk about resiliency, it is easy to sit in the classroom. It is easy to write papers on why it's important. It's easy to talk about why resiliency needs to be done and how we have to be responsible about it. And everybody agrees with that. But every single one of these issues isn't even standalone. Most of them are overlapping. They frequently influence each other. And this is the network of challenge that the Corps and its partners has to navigate in order to make resiliency a reality. So I hope you are thinking through this, where you can fit in and how you potentially could innovate and help us through some of these challenges. And I'll tell you, I showed this to my Civil Works program chief. He saw the brief and he said, "You make our job look easy." Okay, and I'm like, well, shoot, I was trying to make it look hard. So that's his perspective on this slide, because it is much more complicated than my little cartoon sketch is, but I'm trying to give you guys an element of that. And so the reality is sometimes we ask ourselves, how do we ever get this done? But the reality is, next slide, is we do. We do. We build billions of dollars of resiliency infrastructure every year, not just the New York district, but across the nation. The Corps of Engineers, with its partners, state, local, and national and federal partners, communities, come together, and through extensive planning, being adaptive to things, compromising with each other and communicating with each other, we get these things done. But I'd like to say it's easy, but it's never easy. But we get there. And with that, I'm ready for your questions. Over here. Oh, that's right. Ben said I had to go over the learning objectives at the end. All right. So, hey, we had a great chance. General Tickner was able to walk through us how the Corps of Engineers actually integrates globally, not just in national security, but enhancing our economy and our national strategy as well. You know, everything that the Corps of Engineers does, internal to the United States and external to the United States, is in concert with our partners to protect the nation. USACE is clearly at the forefront of a lot of the things we do. I'll tell you, regulatory wise, we face those challenges when we talk about pipelines. I know DAPL's a new topic. Well, it's a new old topic that's popped up again. And we really are on the forefront of figuring out the best solutions to bring the latest and greatest resiliency and innovations to the nation. We are the tool through which many of our partners are able to actually execute, because we're the ones given the money to execute the programs. So we need that continued feedback. So we talked about some of the principles of Civil Works, and I focus primarily on the implementation side of it. And anything you guys can do to help us with that implementation, again, deciding that we need a project and what needs to be done is relatively the easy part. Now, the study guys are going to yell at me because it's not easy, but the execution can be just as difficult. And I hope I was able to lay out some of those challenges, and you can take that away and think about it. And if you got any really good ideas, hit me up, because I'm open to anything to help my guys mitigate what we do on a day-to-day basis. With that, okay, Ben, now I think I'm done.
Thank you, sir. And with the time that we have, I want to first open it up to the audience. Medea, if you could help guide us through the chat, since I can't see that. and just let us know, are there questions out there that we can have our wonderful speakers address? And before we do that, as you're looking at the chat, let me just say thank you both to Colonel Luzzatto and Brigadier General Tickner for your deliberate and informative discussion. And I'll tell, on a personal note, it sure makes me happy to be an engineer officer with you all stewarding our profession. So thank you. Medea, what questions are out there?
Okay, I'm going to read off Suzanne's question in a second. I just want to remind everybody who's watching that if you want the PDH credits, look for an email from me that's going to have a link to the survey. You have to answer the survey questions if you want to get the PDH credits. And I took attendance, so I know you were here. And if you, yeah, everybody had their names, so I could identify everyone. All right, so Suzanne asks, can you comment on HATS, H-A-T-S, and concur that the study has been reauthorized? What will be the process going forward? And she has another question.
Okay.
I'll go to that one in a minute. The other one is on Sandy. Go
One
ahead.
at a time. So the good news on HATS is we requested a waiver for time, which we have received. And we are currently in the process of seeking additional funding to continue on with HATS. Right now, General Tickner's team's doing a great job of finding funding for us to be able to execute that. We think we're getting close to being able to have that from other projects that may have not utilized all their funds, getting that reprogrammed. It's a congressional act to reprogram money from one project to another project. So General Tickner's team's working hard to say, hey, this particular project no longer needs this funding. Let's go over here and move it to HATS. We have projects identified. And once we have that, I have a team that's chomping at the bit to get right back after it. Here in the next couple months, we believe we should hopefully see that funding.
Great. So the second question is, since Sandy, what Sandy-related projects has USACE executed? Any insight on how USACE will mitigate flooding projects to incorporate consideration of social justice?
Okay, so I don't have the comprehensive list in front of me. I can tell you we're about 50% complete on all those projects that we've done. Coney Island, the King of Rockaways, we're about 50% done. I don't have the list in front of me. But I will tell you, as far as environmental justice goes, we're taking a close look at the projects that are already. So I'm on the execution side, and we're focused on what has been authorized and appropriated for. So we take a look at how we can sequence destruction to mitigate portions of the projects that are on the back bay side of things, which is typically where the disadvantaged communities are, and figuring out how best to get after those projects. And then on the study side, that is always something that is a key factor in the studies that we take a look at to ensure that there is, again, it's an engineer-focused basic emphasis and not focused primarily on only particularly wealthy areas. Let's put it that way. So that study is being done in that framework.
And Matt, I'll add a little bit more environmental justice, because it is a significant or increasing category. We've been doing it for a while. I've seen it written into EISs, and now we've even gone a step farther over the last couple of years, where it's part of how we prioritize projects around the country. So the administration will look at it, and that is one of the categories. It's how we fund certain things in very remote areas. I saw it in Alaska, but it obviously could be a local challenge, a local one.
Okay, now the only other question I see a lot of thank yous, and thank you for your service. Thank you for the presentation. It's been really excellent. And someone is asking if they can post with a snapshot on LinkedIn. I believe that's fine. We've recorded the session, And I plan to get the recording up on the USGBC YouTube page, along with all the other sessions in this series, because we're leading up to one in the fall. That's a kind of a mini summit revisiting all of these topics. You'll see some questions about that in your survey as well. So those will all be posted. And then there's one other comment here. Shortly after Sandy, we had a program at the MDL Joint Base, and General Owen presented the program. A question was raised regarding the rebuild, and General Owen said that they could only restore, not improve. Has this been changed?
Okay, and I'm not exactly sure where that is, but it may be along the lines of our PL 8499 capability, where we have the ability, should it be funded after a storm, to return a piece of infrastructure back to what it was previously. And so emergency funding can only return things back to their original pre-storm design level. We cannot build upon it. It takes a whole study and an additional project that is authorized and appropriated to add on to it. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's probably what it was, something like that.
Okay.
Medivh, I have a question, actually. So this is Lieutenant Colonel retired Eric Backus calling. And gentlemen, superb presentation. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it, sir. Really, there's a movement afoot to talk about a very large infrastructure spending bill, and a lot of different things. Obviously, a good portion of that is going to come into the world of USACE. I'm very well aware from spending 20 years there myself and working a lot of issues. Maybe you could speak a little bit about the partnerships you're going to need to tackle that. Obviously, COVID response required a lot of private partners, contractors, so on. Former chief of engineers was down there trying to make the Javits Center work for the COVID response. And so there's a lot of things you guys have done in North Atlantic Division and specifically the New York district. So maybe you could speak a little bit about what are the things you're going to need to be able to execute a large infrastructure bill if that comes to fruition, like it's being talked about right now, and what type of help could you use to make that work?
Yeah, well, I'll start off and I'll give you the big picture, and Matt may get into the more details of what he's seeing already, but I'll tell you, you're right. The infrastructure package is going to go across a whole bunch of agencies. The Corps of Engineers may have a piece to it. We definitely have some projects that we think fit right in line, but it will bleed between agencies. So that we're doing, they'll be involved, but the resource agencies got to get on board with it too. So part of this is, how do you do projects? You partner, and if we really treat it as an emergency, in this case, rebuilding America's infrastructure, we'll need the resource agencies on board early, and they'll be at the table. Matt talked all about the local and public support that's required. Again, funding in this case, how is it funded? Does it need to be cost shared? That takes time, potentially, for our cost sharing partners to come up. But if it's somehow it doesn't have to be cost shared, then we can move out, right away, at least with funding not being an issue. Industry may already have great ideas of what they're trying to do. The best projects that I've seen is when it's, it helps the local industry or local city. It also helps the Department of Transportation, because they're trying to do something, and then the Corps of Engineers has a piece to it too, whether we're protecting the infrastructure that they're developing. It's always a shame when we're disconnected and we're building something that's protecting an area potentially, and there's another Department of Transportation is up the street doing something else, totally disconnected, where if we just actually work together, you get a big bang for the buck to do it, but specific to the New York area.
Sir, all I would add is I would argue that we've been executing a large infrastructure bill with Sandy and many of the other emergency supplementals that have come out in the last decade or so. So it's really business as normal for us at the district. I will tell you, obviously, we are going to need more folks in the district. So I encourage anybody, we are hiring. We're looking for a few good folks to join us as we go through this. But aside from that, just that continued partnership with our partners and people coming up with innovative ideas that may help us get through some of those challenges I highlighted. That's what's going to help us. So again, keep those thinking caps on. And if you got solutions, let me know. Oh.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. I think in the interest of respecting your time and all those that are here, I think we're approaching the end, our end point. But we really do appreciate your time and just wonderful presentation, wonderful discussion. I think very eye-opening in everything that the Corps does and the considerations about that transparent communication, the partnerships that enable us to move our country forward, thinking with resilience in the background of everything we do. So thank you again. For everyone who's here, our next session will be on June 16th. You see here, it will be the science of storm surge risk reduction. We've got this session and then one final one, like I said, at the end of September or the very beginning of October. We look forward to you joining for that. Thank you all once again for being here, for the whole community who is here. Thank you to the team running this. Medea, you're just a superstar that makes us all work. So thank you so much. And Colonel Luzzatto, Brigadier General Tickner, wonderful leaders, and thank you for being here.
Great job, everybody. Thank you.